Hello and welcome to another edition of One Voice at a Time. This evening I have the privilege of sitting next to a man who has done many things in the field of writing, journalism, book author, co-author, and his name is Hedrick Smith. Hedrick wrote a book recently that was just released last fall, Who Stole the American Dream? And we're going to be talking about this book this evening. So, Hedrick, I want to talk to you about your credentials, first of all. Now, I know that you were a journalist. New York Times? Was that
New York Times,
New York
26
Times?
years.
Okay. And I also know that you won a Pulitzer Prize.
Actually, Sheridan won Pulitzer Prize on the Pentagon Papers, which we produced at the New York Times, and then I was a correspondent in Moscow, and I won the Pulitzer Prize from Moscow and Eastern Europe as well.
And I happen to know that you wrote The Russians.
Yes.
This was in my library when I just was
good.
working in my library
Good,
recently.
good, that's
So
great.
that came up, and I said, I think I'm going to know that man.
Yeah.
You decided to write this book. When did you start?
I started work on it, Dottie, back in 2009 when the economy was in a real mess. I had done, for 20 years, made documentaries for PBS and for Frontline on subjects like the Wall Street fix. Is Walmart good for America? Can you afford to
Interesting
retire?
one.
Tax me if you can. Challenge to America. A lot of pieces about the economy and how it works. Healthcare, critical condition, 3 hours for PBS 1 year. So I got into the housing thing. What was going on with the housing bubble? What was going on with the subprime crisis? And that just kept leading me further and further into the banking system. Like a lot of people, I knew some economics, but not a lot. So I had to study economics. I got into the housing crisis. I was going to actually do a documentary for PBS on the housing. But when I got into it, I began to see things that looked like what I'd seen before. The job offshoring that I did in the Walmart show, the big link between the banks, big banks and big corporations
Now,
in the Wall Street fix.
Is offshoring like outsourcing?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
sending jobs offshore. But I'd seen that, I'd seen what happened in the healthcare system, and now I started to get into the housing thing, and I said, maybe I'm not going to do a documentary. America's in trouble, the dream is in trouble, but I didn't sign a contract to write a book called Who Stole the American Dream. I signed a contract with my publisher to write a book, The Dream at Risk. Because what I knew then was it was at risk. 600,000 people were getting laid off every month. Millions of people were getting foreclosed out of their homes. The economy was headed for a cliff. We didn't know we were going to have another Great Depression. And so I was interested in finding out what was going on, how did we get here? Because I remembered back as I came out of college and got into the beginnings of my career at United Press and at the New York Times, there was pretty widely shared prosperity. Middle-class people were doing pretty well. They weren't rich, but their jobs were secure. Now jobs were insecure. The people had homes and they were owning their homes. Here was going on. Banks were taking the homes back from people. The stock market was shooting up and then shooting way down. It was a very risky time. And so I want to know, how do we go from there to here? How do we go from this widely shared prosperity to this very unequal situation in the economy that we have today? How do we go from bipartisan politics that actually worked? I mean, Lyndon Johnson was a Democrat, Richard Nixon was a Republican. They fought, the parties fought, but they passed a budget every year. They passed Medicare, they passed civil rights laws, they passed defense funding and that kind of stuff. They didn't fight the way things are going on today, not polarized and shut down and all that kind of stuff. So I wonder what happened to our economic system, what happened to our political system that got us into the mess we're in. So I started with a whole lot of questions. I didn't have many answers.
And you went back and actually kind of started this with things that happened back in the 40s when the change started to...
Really in the 70s. It's really in the 70s that there were some things in the 40s, but I was...
That didn't become an issue.
What's interesting about the 40s, if you go back and you look at America, from 1945, the end of World War II, until the mid-70s, we had very widely shared prosperity. The productivity of the American workforce, the efficiency, gains in the economy, profits for companies, but the productivity of the American workforce, it roughly doubled. It went up 97%. And at the same time, the standard of living, the income of the average family, the median family, right in the middle, it went up 95%. So 97% growth in productivity, 95% growth in family income at the right at the middle. Dollar for dollar, the gains of the economy, the efficiency, the productivity, the profits got passed through to ordinary people.
And a large part of the dream at that time was the life that I have, I can make sure my children are going to have even better.
Sure, you want a steady job. You want rising pay over your lifetime because your skill is getting better. You're more valuable to people you work for. You want a health benefit. You want a retirement benefit. We've forgotten. In 1980, 84% of the people who worked for companies with 100 or more employees had a lifetime pension. That meant when you retired at 65 or 58 or whenever you retired, you got a monthly check from your company until the day you died, along with Social Security, on top of Social Security. Today, it's down. Only 30% get that, and most of those are older people. That's gone now. It's 401ks, finance it yourself, pay for it yourself. And at the same time, 70% of the people in those same companies had fully paid employer health benefits. So you weren't paying for it yourself if you were working for one of those companies. Today it's down to about 18%. So terrific difference between then and now, the security that people had and the kind of sharing of the wealth and sharing the benefits of growth. And partly that was because business leaders believed in it. You know, Dottie, that was so interesting to me when I went back and I looked in the history. When you read what Charlie Wilson, he was the CEO of General Motors.
Yes.
And Reg Jones, he was the CEO of General Electric. And Frank Abrams, he was the CEO of Standard Oil of New Jersey, what's ExxonMobil today. They all believed it was the job of the CEO to support the interests of all the stakeholders in the corporation, employees as well as owners, suppliers, creditors, customers, communities they operate in, share the wealth. They said, that's smart business. It's going to help the economy, pay your workers well, they go spend their money, that's strong consumer demand. It's consumer demand, by the way, which is what pushes the economy. That's the job creators. Job creators are not the people at the top. Job creators are all of us right in the middle, spending our money, pushing business to expand production. Business is sitting on money today, $2 trillion. They're not spending their money. And it's not because of what's going on in Washington. Sometimes it is, but mostly it's because consumers don't have enough money. Middle-class people don't have enough money. There's not enough demand to build houses, to produce more cars, to make refrigerators or microwaves or cell phones or you name it. I mean, cell phones are selling worldwide because it's growth in China and that kind of stuff. So that consumer demand was there, and it's what the economists call the virtuous circle of growth. If you pay a lot of people well, they go spend their money. There's a kind of a circle. Then the business expands production, hires more people, buys more equipment, and it starts again.
Makes sense.
That's what made America powerful, great, successful, and gave a lot of people gave the American people their dream. A home, a job, and hope for their kids doing better in the future.
And I know that people in that era, that grew up in that era, working in that era, also understood that their loyalty and their good productivity was going to be rewarded by their CEOs also caring about what kind of circumstances they were living in.
And you're right about that. The CEOs believed in that, and you go back and read it, and you can see what they had to say. Not only that, they were building plants in America. When they built new plants, they built in America. They didn't move the chip fab plants for computer chips and that kind of stuff. They didn't move them to China. They didn't have Walmart putting pressure on people to make socks or people to make lawnmowers or people to make microwave ovens or whatever. Go get really cheap Chinese labor, make the cheapest product you can in China, move your production overseas. You didn't have that going on in that period.
And it is getting to the point where it's hard to find things that were not made overseas. You have to really look.
Somebody did an interesting experiment. They tried to live for a year without buying anything that was made in China. And they had a terrible time. They could hardly buy things. And food, certain things they could get, but all kinds of consumer products, from T-shirts and socks to microwave ovens, television sets, you name it. A lot of them made in China.
ABC World News Tonight actually did a couple of experiments on that same thing, where they went into a home and challenged the people to move out everything that had not been made in America. I believe one of them ended up with a small table and a clock. There was not much left once they moved out everything that wasn't in China. And then they had to go out and figure out how to refurnish that house with things that were made in America. It's very difficult.
And what you're talking about there is jobs.
Right.
You're talking about, I mean, furniture is a good example. That's what you said. I mean, furniture industry is heavily concentrated in North Carolina. A lot of people in it. Textile industry used to be up here in New England, moved down to South Carolina, Georgia, whatnot. Silicon Valley,
Right.
California.
Right.
A lot of production there for the computers, computer chips, computer printers, and that kind of stuff. Moved to India, moved to China, moved to Korea, moved to Japan. So it's cost us a lot.
And you did a documentary on Walmart,
Right.
and is that where you really started putting the facts together that
Yes.
Walmart was having a heavy influence
Yes.
on the rest of
What
the
we found
corporations?
What we found out was, and there's a whole chapter about Walmart
Yes.
in this book, Who Stole the American Dream. And what we found out was that there were several things Walmart was known for. It was known for not promoting women, not paying women very well.
Right.
It was known for hiring people who were illegally immigrants in this country to be their custodians, to do the cleaning of their stores overnight. They did it usually through subcontractors. They didn't hire them directly. And the third thing was coming in and undercutting the local retail stores with a big Walmart store and driving those stores out of business.
Mom and pop.
Mom and pop stores.
Yeah.
But what wasn't known, and we were among the first to really go into this, was the degree to which Walmart had gained power over the big American manufacturing companies, General Electric, Procter and Gamble, you name it, as well as lots of middle-sized, Huffy bicycles, all kinds of electronic television companies, whatnot, because Walmart became so big, and they used that thing called the barcode that we all have
Yes,
on all our products.
yes, yeah.
And that when people checked out of the counters at Walmart, the computers in those checkout cash registers registered how many items had sold, and they could tell them right away overnight which ones to buy.
Right.
And it wasn't just buy ties or buy jackets or buy jeans or whatever. They said buy size 37 jeans.
Buy the red
straight
ties.
leg. Yeah, and
Yeah.
they were able to identify it exactly. So what happened was Walmart had more information, and they could tell the American producers what was selling faster than the producers
Right.
themselves knew. So power, because of information, shifted from the producers to Walmart. And then Walmart, because it was so big, had so many stores, had so much shelf space, could then dictate to the American companies, look, Rubbermaid, we want you to make cheaper garbage cans and totes and office, filing cabinets and that kind of stuff. We want them cheaper, we want them lower quality, different color, whatever. And if you don't do it, we're going to move it to China. So in the end, they pushed Rubbermaid, they pushed other companies to go do their low-end production. Everything. I mean, and we've got interesting stories there about Walmart. So I began to see these things. And then I saw the 401k. For the 401k, as I said, everybody got their pension from their
Employer.
employers. 401k comes in. It was never even intended as a national retirement plan. It was actually a tax shelter for executive profit-sharing bonuses at Xerox and Kodak.
Interesting.
And their companies had headquarters in Rochester, New York, and the local congressman up in Rochester, New York, put into the bill in Congress in 1978, think of it, 401k. Who would ever name a program 401k? You'd never do that. Why? It's paragraph 401 in the tax code, so it's all the way
Yeah.
down in the tax code, hidden, and then all the way down under 401k, all the way down to K. So Barbara Conable was the name of this congressman, and he put it in. Almost nobody else noticed it, and it was for the executives. It was long-term tax shelter for their profit-sharing bonuses. And then some other people said, oh, well, let's include regular pay, well, let's include regular workers, and then the mutual fund industry said, wow, if we get regular people
We need to
with
get in
their
there.
regular pay and we can manage that money, we can make tens of billions of dollars, and that's
Yeah.
exactly what happened.
Yeah.
American people got sold. Do-it-yourself retirement, don't let your boss do it. It's been a disaster, Dottie. The median balance in a 401k plan today, you have any idea what it is?
I
What would
do
you
not.
guess? What would you guess?
Maybe 250,000?
20,000.
20,000.
20,000.
20,000.
The median balance for people who are on the verge of retirement in their 60s, 85,000. Now,
Oh,
the average person, if you retire at 65, the average person lives 17 years. 17 plus 65 gets you to 82. So half the people live till 82, Half the people live beyond 82.
Right.
Okay? But they only have $85,000 plus Social Security. That $85,000 is gone in about the first 5 or 6 years. So they're out of luck.
Right.
That is where we are. Now, what happened was, and I began to see this, dream at risk? Maybe somebody's snitching the dream here. All the cost, not all the cost, but the big bulk of the cost of retirement went from the corporate books to the pocketbooks and the checkbooks of ordinary people. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year is now spent by ordinary people who, by the way, are not making any more money
Right.
than they were making back in the 1970s. The Census Bureau told us last year that in 2011, the average male worker, the median male worker, right in the middle of the economy, made the same pay in 2011 as in 1978 per hour. Same pay
Wow.
and benefits. So that's 3 decades, adjusted for inflation, that's
of course.
3 decades of going nowhere. Cost of medical care has gone way up.
Yeah.
Cost of housing has gone
Way
way
up,
up.
yeah.
Cost of college education has gone way up. Other things, food, gasoline, that kind of stuff, they've gone up. Wages have kept up with
Yeah,
them, but they haven't
yeah.
kept up with the big things. People are going into debt. And the reason they're going into debt is they're not getting any more pay at the middle. They're not getting any more pay than they were back in the late 1970s.
And I hear you saying that the corporations are sitting on trillions?
$2 trillion.
Okay. So that's money that we can't spend because it's not coming back into our pockets in any way, shape, or form as retirement benefit or wages.
Right?
Don't they see the folly in that? That if people can't spend more money, they can't make more money?
Well, it's very interesting this happened, Dottie. It's a very good question. It's a very good question. Some of them see it, but they don't know how to do anything about it. But you know what the others have done? They've said, hey, if there's trouble in the American economy, we're going to go move our
Elsewhere.
production to China, to India. We're going to market to India and China and Korea and Japan and Malaysia and the Philippines. And we're going to market in Europe. We're going to market in Australia and New Zealand. Lots of big American corporations now make more profits overseas than they do in this country. And they pay lower taxes. The tax rate overseas, they don't pay any taxes on the profits they make overseas. If they make them here at home, unless they get some kind of write-off, they pay 35%. And then what they do is they gang up. A bunch of them did this in 2005. They had
I
$1 trillion.
saw, yeah.
And they said to the government, they said to Congress, they said to President Bush, look, we'll bring back that $1 trillion. We'll spend that money, we'll create jobs in America, but we want a good deal. We want you to drop the tax rate for us from 35% down to 5.5%. So the companies that are here in America, the hotels and the restaurants and your local businesses here in New Hampshire, they're paying 35%, maybe 32%. The big corporations, GE, Microsoft, Procter & Gamble, Pfizer, Goldman Sachs, you name them, the big boys, they're paying either 0 or when they bring it back, they're paying 5 or 6%. It's a joke. And they figured out how to do that. They got the political muscle, they go lobby Washington for it, and they get a really good deal. So they say, all right, so American economy is not moving so well. We'll just move more production overseas. We'll do more business overseas. The last 4 years, Dottie, American corporate profits went up an average of 20.1% a year. Corporate profits, 20.1%, 4 years in a row. That's over 4 years, that's more than 80%. The average salary, the average household income at the same time went up 1.4%. 4 years, that's less than 6%. 80%, 6%. What's happened is big multinational corporations have become disconnected from our economy, and they're making money overseas. Yes, they're making some money here, no question about it. But even Apple. Apple makes money selling you and me cell phones. But you know what they do? They invent the cell phone in a place called Cupertino, California. That's where the headquarters of Apple are. They're engineers, they're bright young people, electronic engineers, the computer programmers, all these people who work on this very fancy, wonderful gadget. It's invented, American genius, okay? Not all of it's invented, some's invented in Germany, some in Japan, but the bulk of it's invented in America. You know what they do? They say, you know, there's a lower tax rate in Ireland, and we have a little subsidiary over in Ireland. Why don't we transfer the patent for the invention of certain parts of the cell phone, we'll transfer it to our subsidiary in Ireland.
Wow.
Okay? And so what happens there is we still own it, Apple as a company.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to say all the profits that we made selling cell phones in America, we're going to say it was actually earned by our subsidiary over there in Ireland because they have the patent for all this stuff.
And
So they transfer that, and so they get all that earnings out from American taxes.
Now, at the same time, are they taking advantage of, is it H-1B?
H1.
H-1B, so
right.
so the people that are doing those inventions
Yeah.
are actually not always from here either.
Well, it's probably more true in the case of Apple that they use less H-1B people on those inventions. But at
that's-
Microsoft,
yeah.
the H-1B are foreigners,
Mm-hmm.
particularly from India, because India has a pretty good educational
Mm-hmm.
system. People who come out of India who study computer programming or engineering or something like that, they get a pretty good education. And so American companies can use them. Microsoft, I think at one point, I have in my book, Microsoft acknowledged that they have 38% of their employees are either H-1B, that is foreigners
Mm-hmm.
who are working in the United States, taking American jobs from Americans, or they've got green cards. But most of them are H-1B. So you're right. Here we have even work done in America, but it's not being
Still
done
not-
by
yeah.
Americans, and there are qualified Americans in the market. The law is really loose. They're not required to prove that they could have hired Americans or couldn't have hired Americans. So here you have some jobs being lost because we're importing workers, and then you have taxes being lost because Apple makes this smart deal and says, oh, well, that really was invented over there in Ireland. We're going to pretend that, and so we're going to get out of
Yeah.
taxes. So what's happened is when you said, don't the corporations understand that if middle-class Americans aren't paid well, they're going to get hurt? They've figured out ways to get around it, and they do it by going global. And we're stuck here, and the corporations can go global, and we have a hard time chasing them, either for jobs or for taxes, so they pay their fair rate. So it's become an economic game, and the game favors the people who've got the smartest economists, the smartest accountants, the smartest lawyers, the smartest people lobbying up on the Hill, and they get tremendous advantages going to Congress and saying, write the laws in ways that we can find loopholes in and ways to get through. And that's part of what's going
Yeah.
on in Who Stole the American Dream. This is how the dream is getting stolen from average people.
I kind of wonder if we're not headed down the road towards a French Revolution situation. We eliminate that middle class, we have the haves and the have-nots, and nobody in between. What's going to happen to us?
You're asking a very good question. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have a crystal ball. But there's no question that we become a much more divided country over the last 30 or 40 years. We're divided by money, we're divided by power, and now, as you can see in Washington today and in the politics that you read about every day in the paper or listen to on television, we're becoming very divided philosophically,
Yes,
ideologically,
yes.
and we've got real problems in our political system because we have gerrymandered districts. We can get into that later. But yes, you're right. There's a very high cost to our being as divided a country as we are. And, this isn't just me saying this. This isn't just, say, liberal economists or Keynesian economists like Paul Krugman, who writes for the New York Times, or Joe Stiglitz, who's at Columbia University. Citigroup, big investment bank, conservative business. Citigroup said in 2005 that the income inequality in America today, huge differences of income inequality. In the old days, Charlie Wilson, maybe head of GM, made 40 times what one of his average workers made. Some people say 32, depends upon how you count things. Today, it's like 350, 400 times. I told you before that the pay of people in the middle stagnated.
Right.
The pay of CEOs has gone up 350% over the last bunch of years, from 78 to 2011. At the top, it's gone up 600%. So you're dead even here. There's a wedge. I call it wedge economics. There's a wedge driven right in the middle of our economy, and the people in the middle are stuck. The people below the middle are going down. The people above the middle are going up a bit. And by the way, the middle is a range from about $30,000 to about $110,000 a
Right,
year
yeah.
in household income. A lot of people call themselves
That's
middle
not
class.
rich.
No, but there are a lot of people who say, "Oh, I'm middle class. I make $250,000." If you make $250,000, you're in the top 2 or 3% in America.
yeah.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But the point is, if we are this divided, What kind of risks are we running? That's what you're asking. Are we going to have a French Revolution? I don't know. Americans are not inclined, to be violent, to get that way. But you can't go on having people in the middle and the working poor feel squeezed and not get some
Yeah.
I mean, Occupy Wall Street was kind of a burst of that, a protest, but it just tapped the surface.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going around the country talking to people. Americans are unhappy today.
They are.
By today, I don't mean because of the government shutdown. I mean they're unhappy over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yes.
People are fed up with not getting a fair share.
Yeah, not getting anywhere. And I think too that you have people who would not necessarily be able to put this together in their minds, that things happened in this sequence and this is why it happened.
Yes.
What happened and why it happened.
Yeah.
And now, okay, we've identified a problem and now what are we going to do about it? It's overwhelming to the average person.
Yes, it is.
To try and do something about it, even one-on-one with themselves. How do I make a difference in my own home
Right.
so that my kids will have a better chance?
Part of what's going on is Americans, I mean, you have to admire this about Americans. Americans feel individually responsible.
Yes.
I've got to take care of myself, I've got to take care of my family, and we got to work together here.
Yeah.
But part of what's happened here is that the economic system has changed. And if you look at it, here we are 4 years into a recovery, more than 4 years. We have 22 million Americans today who want full-time work and who
can't
cannot
find
get
it,
it.
yep.
Okay? They're either unemployed totally, or they've dropped out, or
Right.
they're working part-time and they
Yeah.
want full-time work.
Yeah.
When you have 22 million Americans not being
Affected,
able to
yeah.
get a job, that's not their fault. The economic system is not working. But at the same time, you got people in Wall Street picking up $140 billion of bonuses every year from their banks.
Yeah.
You got CEOs making 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, $90 million a year. The record was Larry Ellison, who made $701 million in 1 year. I got all details from the Wall Street
Do we have
Journal.
even any football players who make that much in a year?
Well, I don't know if they make that much, but they make a lot. But entertainment, we sort of make an exception of
different. Yeah,
entertainment.
it's
And I'm
different.
talking
Yeah.
about where you're producing things, where you've got large corporations. It's gotten so lopsided. I mean, people in Hollywood, people, singers,
Yeah, no,
athletes, that kind of.
yeah.
Well, it's gotten to the point where average families can't afford to go to the game anymore.
This is true.
You got stars making this is called a winner-take-all economy. This is called a star-studded economy. This is a superstar economy. People have different names for it. This is a system that changed. You talk about the individual family. One of the things I had forgotten that's really important. It took me 2.5 years to write this book. I did a whole year of research before I ever wrote a single word of this
Yeah.
book. I went back. I had forgotten. Back in the 60s and the 70s, when we had a kind of fairly fair distribution of income, shared prosperity, one of the reasons we had that was there was a powerful middle class.
Yes.
We had a consumers movement where Ralph Nader was writing a book, Unsafe at Any Speed, said Detroit is making cars that are causing accidents because the brakes don't work or the tires explode or whatever. We had a women's movement said it's not fair. Women are getting paid 41 cents on the dollar for doing the same work as men. We had a civil rights movement where Negroes said, we want to vote, we want to stay in the hotels, we want to eat at the lunch counters, we want the same break as everybody else. We had an environmental movement. We had a strong labor movement that negotiated with the big companies to make sure that there were good benefits and good and rising pay. We had all those movements from the middle class.
Yeah.
We are not going to get back, I don't believe. We're not going to get back to reclaiming the American dream. And my book is Who Stole the American Dream? I hope the next book is How We Reclaim the American Dream.
Yeah.
So reclaiming the dream is something we got to do. You can't reclaim the dream on your own. Some people can.
Yeah.
Some people can, but if they do, they're going to shove other people away. The great bulk of people aren't going to make it unless we organize. You can't beat organized political money, and that's what we have now. Huge, billions of dollars spent on lobbying, billions of dollars, $7
And we
billion
can't
in
stand
the
up to
last
that.
political campaign. The last political campaign
Yeah.
cost $7 billion.
Yeah.
They spend $3.5.
That's obscene.
It's obscene. But it also is not something that you and I could do much about.
No.
Even if we could fork up $100 or $150 or $200, $250, not close to what some of these billionaires
No.
can put up. We're not going to get anywhere until we have organized people organized, active, off their couches, out in the streets, like the consumers movement, women's movement, environmental movement, labor movement, organized people matching organized money. Otherwise, organized money is going to win the day every time.
Every time.
We vote We go vote for a president, we go vote for a Senate, we go vote for members of Congress, and when we get done, we go back to our lives, because we're busy.
And we
what
expect
happens
them-
is the
yeah.
lobbyists go to work the next morning to undo the results of the election.
Yeah.
And that's what's been going
Yeah.
on now for easily the last decade or two. So we gotta change something. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got to change our own behavior. We got to believe ourselves.
And I think too, again, to bring something down to like the local level that happens nationally, when you're talking about electing somebody and sending them to Congress, my belief is that we don't know what they're going to do when they get there. We have to stay in touch with them. We have to watch them. We have to make sure they hear from us. And I don't think there's enough of that going on. So they're hearing from the lobbyists, like you say, every day, but they're not necessarily hearing from the constituents every day. And they don't know until we get mad about something.
And then we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
You know, it's a good example is the banks. Because the banks took us over the cliff, right?
Yes.
The banks went crazy. They
Yeah.
went with derivatives.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you just see the story? J.P. Morgan Chase is paying $13 billion in fines because it marketed bogus mortgages, bad mortgages on the market.
I did not.
Biggest fine of any company in history. And it all comes from the financial crisis. And I can tell you, I follow this closely. I cannot read the papers any week without some bank admitting it did something wrong and paying a fine. It's
Yeah.
been going,
Yeah.
they're manipulating interest rates, they're manipulating commodity prices, they're doing it illegal. I'm talking about rigging,
Yeah.
where they
Yeah,
actually have to
actually
pay
make an effort
penalties,
to-
okay?
yeah.
So they take us over the cliff. And what happens? People are furious.
Yeah.
Occupy Wall Street comes out and says, Occupy Wall Street. Why Wall Street? Because it's the
That's the
banks that
beginning,
did it.
yeah.
Okay. And then there's this big protest, and people don't know what to do about it. Then we get to Washington. So you think, well, the public is angry at the banks, Washington's going to do something about it, the president's going to do something about it, Congress is going to do something about it, and they write a piece of legislation. Now listen to what I'm about to tell you, Dottie. You won't believe it. The banks, financial services industry, big six banks on Wall Street, plus a number of other insurance companies, big money, they hire 1,440 former members of Congress, former staff, people who work on the committees that write legislation to regulate banks, and former officials at the U.S. Treasury Department to lobby Congress to make sure that the legislation that gets passed doesn't hurt the banks. So the legislation gets passed, and the president says, well, we got a bill passed, and so we feel good about it, and people heave a sigh of relief. In fact, that bill doesn't do enough. It's not good enough. And why doesn't it? Because little by little they pull the strings. It's like pulling on the threads of a sweater,
Unravel.
and they unravel the sweater. So you're sitting there thinking you're nice and warm, you got a sweater on, and when it gets chilly, all the
Gone.
threads go. That's what we've done in the legislation, and we did it because there were people untying the stitching. Former majority leader of the House, Democrat, Richard Gephardt, former Republican majority leader of the House, Dick Armey, Trent Lott, former majority leader of the Senate. Yeah, 4 of them, top people in Congress, and all the people who worked on those committees, they know exactly how to
do
fiddle
it.
with it, and we don't get it. We don't see, even when the media is covering it, that stuff is so complicated.
Yeah.
It is so
Yeah.
arcane that unless you have people educating you and telling you what's going on, and they don't want you to find out. They want it to be confusing. They want it to be complicated. So that's what's going on. So here we are sitting here, thinking, hoping, praying, they're not going to take us over another cliff. I don't believe it. I believe that unless we do something more than we've done now, we're going to go over another cliff and we're going to pay for it again. We have to organize and say, Congress, you got to regulate those banks. We have to organize and say, Congress, it's crazy to have a tax system where the companies that move jobs and production and plants and research and development overseas pay a lower tax rate than the companies that keep jobs in America. We have to understand that's what's going on. I've tried to put this as clearly as I can in this book, Who Stole the American Dream, so that people can see how the stealing goes on, who the thieves are, and then do something about it. But then we have to say, okay, we understand it. Now we got to get organized. We got to do something about it. We got to reclaim the dream. We got to bring it back to us.
With such global polarization in Congress, how do we get them to work together on something? I mean, I can't even figure out what polarized them so badly.
Well, I'll tell you what polarized them so
Okay,
badly,
I was hoping you would.
Yeah, I'll tell you what polarized them so badly. Aside from disagreements, which there are, there was a guy named Eldridge Gerry, only his name was Gary, and we have a thing called gerrymandering. And
Gerrymandering.
it started in the state of Massachusetts, just south of here, in 1812.
I remember that from school.
High
Yep.
school history you learn
Yep.
about. Okay. Gerrymandering has gotten so sophisticated because you can draw the district lines now
I
with a
have
computer.
I've seen
with a
them.
computer and software, okay?
Yeah.
And what's happened is that the parties have gotten so sophisticated. This is now done by the parties, okay? Democrats control the legislature and the governorship in Massachusetts in 2010 after the last census. After each census, you redistrict, you
Right.
redraw the lines, you reapportion the membership in Congress, okay? So in Massachusetts and Connecticut, they were in control. So they drew the district lines so it favored the Democrats. In Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin and North Carolina and Texas and a whole bunch of other states, Republicans were in control. So what happens is they gerrymander it so there are a whole lot of safe districts. Republicans in Michigan say, we'll never win in Detroit. Mostly black, poor people, working poor, but we'll take all the suburbs outside of Detroit. We'll take the rural areas. So they draw the district line, so they say, all right, Democrats, you can have 3-4 seats in Detroit. But we'll
You'll
take
take the
everything
rest.
around that, okay? And the Democrats in Massachusetts do it the other way. So both parties are doing it. What happens is you have what are called safe districts. By safe districts, what they mean is the other party doesn't have a chance. They've
Okay.
drawn the line so they don't have a chance. Now, guess what happens when the other side doesn't have a chance? And by the way, roughly 90% of the districts in America today are safe districts. Only about 10% are really competitive. You need competitive districts, so if the public likes what Obama does, they reelect him, and they reelect people with him. If they don't like it, they reject
don't,
him.
yep.
But if you got safe districts, it's like you're punching a pillow. You have no effect whatsoever. So that's one thing. It's prevented voters from being able to express what they feel, what they think, what they want, and getting Congress and the White House to respond. The second thing that happens is, and this gets to your question, what happened to the middle? Why are they so polarized? If you have safe districts, then what happens is the people who are on the wrong side, if you're in a safe Republican district and you're a Democrat or you're independent, you say, there's not much point in my voting. Every time we go out, I vote, I do my duty, but it's always the same guy gets in, or the same woman gets in. It's the other side. And the same thing on the other side. I'm not
Breeds
blaming one
apathy.
party or another. So what happens is, and not only that, even the moderates within the party say, well, yeah, it's more extreme people get elected. And the people who are smart at making political ads and running political campaigns, they go out there. In order to get their voters energized, they do a lot of hate ads, negative ads.
Right,
And they
yeah.
get people all ginned up and they get them hating the other side. That's what gets people to come out. So you get extreme views. You get extreme right on the
Yep.
Republican side, you get more extreme left on the Democratic side. Both parties have done it. The Republican Party has done it more than the Democrats, but both sides. So what happens is people in the middle, the moderate voters, the independents, they get squeezed out of the process. And when they get to Washington, you get what you're seeing right now. You're seeing it played out. All those polarized safe districts create this huge divide. There's a canyon in the middle of Congress. When I first went to Washington in the early 60s as a reporter for the New York Times, you could look at the voting records of conservative Democrats, and you could look at the voting records of liberal Republicans and moderate Republicans, and they overlapped.
Right.
Yes, there were people on both sides that didn't, but there was a middle.
Right, you would expect
That's
that. Yeah.
And there actually are political scientists who've made charts that look like Rorschach
Yeah.
tests.
Yeah.
And you can see them over the time they begin to separate. And now there's a gulf between the two parties. So if we want to fix the polarization, we got to fix gerrymandering.
Yeah.
And there's another thing we can do. We can run open primaries. It's very interesting. What does that mean? We're used to having a Republican primary and a Democratic primary. Republican voters, New Hampshire's a little bit different. You let people choose. And
Right, we did,
But
yeah.
you still have candidates from one party.
Yes,
Candidates from the
yeah.
other. Well, guess what's happened? There are a couple of states, Washington State and California, have started to experiment with what they call the top two primary. It's one primary. Everybody in the district, if you're doing Congress, runs. Everybody running for governor, everybody wants to run for governor. Greens, Libertarians, Democrats, Republicans. And at the end of the primary, the top two go into the general election. And most of the time, it's a Democrat and Republican, but it's not always. Sometimes it's two Republicans running against each other.
Interesting.
Sometimes it's two Democrats. But what happens is, if you have a top two primary that's open to everybody, now the middle voters in the middle, the moderates and the independents, say, hey, I can have an influence here. I'm going to vote. This looks interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to involve. So then the candidates and the people who do their political ads and run their campaigns, they have to start appealing to voters in the middle. So the candidates and the campaigns change. Do you know, I was reading a story in the New York Times today on the plane riding up here. California is now having more bipartisan, more moderate legislation passed in its legislature. California used to be extremely polarized, and guess why?
Why?
Because in the last two elections, they've had open primaries, and the candidates who are getting elected to the California State Assembly are more in the middle, and they're starting to pass legislation that reflects that. The open primary system, the top two primary system, is having a direct effect on the policies being made. So this isn't just somebody's pie-in-the-sky ideas.
Yeah.
If we want to fix this, if we want to, I mean, I don't know the situation well enough in New Hampshire. I know that you have one Republican senator and one Democrat. I know you have a liberal Democrat. I know you have a very conservative Republican. I know you have two Democratic congressmen. I know women, and I know you have a Republican woman, I mean, a Democratic woman who's the governor. But in your legislature, I don't know how well the two parties get along, but if you had open primaries in all your districts, the California experience, and same thing in Washington State, suggests that, number one, you'll get higher turnout, number two, moderates and independents will vote more, and number three, you'll get different people elected and different policies.
And
That's the way we could go.
And don't you find that basically when it comes right down to the wire, people are more interested in voting for the middle because the extremes can be kind of scary?
Well, at the moment, a
So-
lot of people are.
Yeah.
There are more moderates. I don't know, what's the party breakdown here in New Hampshire? Do you have more independents than you have Republicans or Democrats?
I'm not sure.
Or it's
I'm
about,
not
it's
sure.
about even?
Yeah.
Well, even if it's close, even if you have a large body of independents, who, maybe I'll vote in the Democratic
We are
primary.
very
I
independent
know,
in New Hampshire.
well, I know that, I know that. Don't tread on me. I mean, I learned that in American history, I think in high school.
Live free or die.
Yeah, live free or die. But my point is that if you open up these primaries, if you change the political system, you're going to start to get different results. We don't have to be where we are.
Yeah.
We don't have to be here, but we've got to demand change. We have got to insist on change ourselves. It's not going to happen. You know, somebody famous had a statement saying, "Power never surrenders willingly. It only surrenders when it's demanded." In other words, the powers that be, people who like the situation the way it is now, they're not going to change it unless they get pushed.
There's no
We're gonna
reason.
have to push them.
Yeah, there's no reason for them to. We already cut the power shift. That's basically what you're talking about
Well,
with all of that.
Power shift's important. We didn't really go into it. The power shift was the middle class had a lot of power through all those movements I mentioned,
Right.
women's, consumers. There was a huge reaction by business leaders, touched off by a guy named Lewis Powell, who was eventually put on
That's
the
what I was going to
Supreme
just
Court.
ask you about. Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I got to tell you, this happened while I was in Washington. At the end of the 1970s, I was the Washington bureau chief for the New York Times. We could see the impact of a power shift. We could see that legislation that didn't used to get passed was passed. We could see the labor movement was not getting what it wanted. The consumer movement wasn't getting what it wanted. Suddenly, in the late 70s, things began to change, even before Reagan came in, even while the Democrats were in charge of the White House and Congress. And it was basically this guy, Lewis Powell, who was a corporate attorney from Virginia. He was alarmed at the power of all these middle-class movements I was describing, women, labor, consumer, environment, civil rights. And he said, American free enterprise is going to die under all this pressure.
Oh, well.
I think he was exaggerating, but that's how he felt, okay? And so the U.S. Chamber of Commerce got him to write up his ideas. And a kind of a corporate manifesto, a call to arms to corporate America. It's called the Powell Memorandum. And they circulated, the Chamber of Commerce circulated to business leaders all over America. And there was a power shift. They began to move to Washington. All the lobbying that we now see, all the spending, it all starts in the late 70s. Mushrooming number of, we went from, I don't know, 2 or 3 corporate lobbyists, maybe 10 corporate lobbyists per member of Congress. it jumped by the late 70s. 130 lobbyists, 9,000 registered corporate lobbyists, 130 for every member of Congress, 50,000 people working for business trade associations.
Crazy.
Huge shift in the landscape of power, and that began to change. Tax rates began to come down for business. Tax rates came down for the wealthy. Tax rates went up. The payroll tax rate for everybody, that went up, that doubled. So you have stuff coming down at the top. I should be doing it this way for people. Stuff coming down at the top, stuff coming up, tax rates coming up. And from the bottom, estate tax, which benefits, literally affects only the top 2%. The rates are coming down, more exclusions, more benefits for them. And the minimum wage, which affects people at the bottom, is not coming up very fast at all. So you can see the policy impact of this power shift. And we're living with that today.
And those CEOs really started working together. They weren't working independently.
That's right.
They came
Well,
together.
Sometimes they even clashed because their industries sort of had, and they decided, no, we got to work together.
Yeah.
Got to change the laws to benefit, big business as a whole. I
Yeah.
mentioned the tax
I
rates.
thought the Lewis Powell version in here was really interesting. One of the things when you're talking, every time you say the word money, what pops into my mind is greed. It's not, I mean, I think anybody who works hard should be making some money, and I think people who have great ideas should be making money, but I think there's a line that we have to draw between making money and being greedy. In other words, not letting the people who did the work for you get paid for it.
Well, I agree with you, and what is greed and when is it fair? I mean, I think Americans accept the idea of inequality of income. There's some people who work
To a
harder,
point,
some
sure.
people are more
Yeah.
talented,
Oh,
some
absolutely.
people who invent things.
Yeah.
So I think we
Yeah.
accept the idea of inequality. But is there a point at which where it gets so out of whack that it's no longer fair?
It's
And
obscene.
It's obscene, and I think that's the point that people are at now.
I agree. Yeah.
I think I said to you before, if I didn't, I will say it now. Citigroup said we had the greatest inequality of income in America today. This is before the crash, before 2008, the collapse.
Yeah.
We have the greatest inequality of income the world has ever seen since 16th century Spain. America in 2005, 16th century Spain. Amazing. And there are all kinds of studies by other agencies, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, 34 most advanced countries. We have the greatest inequality of income in the OECD, except for Chile and Mexico. So, if you were worried about this becoming a banana republic, you don't have to worry anymore. We're there. We're a banana republic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think you're right. People have a sense that it's gotten out of hand, and when you have, here's a number maybe that people ought to remember. I'll give you two numbers. One is, from 1979 to 2011, the productivity of the American workforce rose 80%. The income of the median average family rose 10%. Remember before I told you in the previous 30 years, it went up 97%, and the income went up 95%, so dollar for
Really
dollar,
close.
the gains were being passed through. But in the last 30, 35 years, it went up 80% productivity. Business was not sharing it with the average family.
Right.
And the reason the average family went up 10% is mostly more women were working more hours because the average male was making the same money.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So you see this gap opening up. From 1979 to 2011, you will not believe the number I'm about to tell you. The top 1% of the people, way at the pinnacle, got 84% of all the income gains of the entire country. 84% went to the top 1%. From 2000 to 2007, more than 100% of the gains went to the top 1%. How's that possible? More than one. Everybody else lost. So over the 7 years of George Bush's presidency, 99% of the people in this country were worse off. This is before the crisis broke.
Right.
2000 to 2007, the crisis broke in 2008. So even when things were so-called good, in quotes, they were terrible
weren't.
for most
Yeah.
people. So yeah, I mean, I think the answer there is by and large, it's greed. I mean, the people at the top, the people with the most power, the people with control of American corporations, the people who were writing the laws, were writing them the way, and they were making the economic decisions that benefited the people at the top.
And
it was selfish.
And there are so many things that contribute to that, because instead of being going to Congress and being interested in the greater good, what's good for the most, for the many, whatever. I think it does get too individualized because the corporations are in there with their major lobbyists, and they can inflict a lot more influence on those congressmen.
Well, and we're going to see it argued out now.
Because you do see them leaving here, and they're still kind of starry-eyed and still think they can go to Washington and do something good.
Right.
And I have to believe that that was their intention. But then so many of them, when they get there, they realize they can't really do it by themselves.
But you got to understand, there's a big difference between what people going to Congress from New Hampshire set out to do than people from rural Alabama or North Dakota. I mean, the people who came from the Tea Party districts and the very conservative districts in the South, they went to Washington basically to burn the place down.
Yes.
They were very open about it.
Yeah.
I mean, Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, very open about it. He does not want government to work. He wants government to shrink. There's a guy named Grover Norquist who's a lobbyist for conservative causes. He's a big anti-tax guy. And he said, I don't want to destroy government. I just want to shrink it so small that I can put it in a bathtub and drown it. Okay? That's what I call bathtub conservatism.
Okay.
Bathtub. Now, he's very clear. He wants to drown
colorful.
the government. Okay? And Ted Cruz wants to do something the same. And the Tea Party want to do something. And you've got Tea Party people in New Hampshire, too. I mean, they're pretty clear that they see the government as the problem, and that's what they want to fix. And, you know, they've been pretty successful in terms of making that the agenda in Washington. But if you look at the record over the last 30 or 40 years, and you compare that with the record of the previous 30 or 40 years, you can see that for average Americans, that has been a disaster. What's really puzzling to me and to a lot of other people is why so many average Americans buy the idea that you should lower taxes on the rich because it'll make things better for average people. It doesn't. In fact, if you look at it, if you look at what's happened, it doesn't. If you buy
I have heard people say the reason they believe that is because then they feel that money won't be invested in the people. But then it's not being invested in the people anyway.
That's right. They're sitting on $2 trillion. No, what drives the growth, what causes the investment in the economy and in average people is the spending power of average people. If business leaders see that average Americans have a lot of money and they're buying cell phones or they're buying cars or they're buying refrigerators or they're taking vacations.
Whatever it is.
Whatever it is, they will gravitate in that direction. And if you don't see business moving, then you better go see. If you're looking at a sailboat and it's sitting out there in the water and it's not going anywhere and doesn't have an engine, then you got to know there's no wind. What's going on in the American economy is there's not enough wind in the sails, and we're the wind. We, the ordinary people, are the wind. And if we don't blow in the sails, it's not going to move.
This is a book that we could talk about for at least 2 or 3 more hours. And I'm hoping that people will go out and buy their own copy and look at it, and especially at the timeline, which, like I said, I found fascinating because it kind of put things into perspective for me as to how could this happen. It was insidious.
I try to boil it down.
But
the timeline, you mentioned the timeline, I don't think people know. On the back of this book, it's called The Stolen Dream Timeline. It's only 12 pages long, folks. You know, and by the way, we haven't even talked about it. I mean, I got stories in this book about Pat O'Neill, the airline mechanic who got his dream stolen. You know, I got the people who worked at the Rubbermaid plant. I got people all over the place here. The computer programmer out in Colorado. Ordinary folks. I mean,
there's some great stories in here. Unfortunately, we only have an hour, so I want to make sure that we get to the really good part. It went fast, didn't it? So what I want to get to now is, so what do we do? Okay, you have a 10-step plan in here.
You know,
let's talk about that so we don't send people home depressed.
Okay, that's fair enough. Well, you know, I have to tell you just a little side story. When I finished the first draft, I actually wrote 5 drafts of this book. When I finished the first draft, I wasn't planning to have the last 2 chapters, which are the 10-point plan you're talking about, 10 steps to reclaim the American dream. 8 of them in the economy, 2 of them politically. And my editor at Random House, the publisher, Kate Medina, is a good friend of mine. She's edited now 4 books of mine. This is my 5th book. All of them, by the way, have been bestsellers, so that's nice.
That is very good.
But she said, Rick, you've got the country in the ditch. You've got to get us out of the ditch. And I said, look, Kate, I'm a reporter. Yeah, I just call balls and strikes.
just- yeah.
I go back and get the facts, ma'am, just
Yeah,
the facts,
yeah.
like Joe Friday.
Yeah.
I lay them out and let the president, let Congress, let the people
Mm-hmm.
decide. She said, no, you got to do it. I resisted, then finally my chief editor, who's my wife, Susan, she said, Rick, Kate's right, you got to do it. So I did.
You did it.
I did.
You did it.
You know,
Well, thank you to her.
yeah, all right, I'm going to tell her you said thank you. Well, yeah, number one, we can fix the tax system, so we close the loophole so companies that move jobs overseas don't pay a lower tax rate than they do the ones here. Number two, we are not aware of it, or you must be aware of it a bit, driving around on our highway system is
Horrible.
a mess.
Horrible.
Railroad lines, or seaports, or airports. There are other countries with much more modern transportation systems than we have. So we need to modernize to get competitive.
Yeah.
And if we modernize and we spend several $1 trillion over several years, we spend some
Of
government
course,
money,
yeah.
mostly we spend money in the private sector, but a bit of a jump start from the government. We will improve our competitiveness globally. We'll bring some jobs back thanks to that, and we'll generate jobs by giving jobs to people to modernize the highways and the roads and the bridges and the railroads and the ports and that kind of stuff. So that's one way we can do it. Another way I mentioned is the tax system. We're falling behind, believe it or not. You can't believe America is starting to fall behind in research and development. And we need to help the manufacturing sector. We now have 9% of our workforce in manufacturing. That's the core of the middle class. That's the core of the economy. We used to have 20%. Today, Germany has 21%. And they're exporting more, and they're paying more to their people than we are. Somehow they've done it with a collaboration between the private sector and the government, between labor and management. We need to get to that. You're starting to see that a little bit in the auto industry. You're seeing a trickle of jobs coming back from China, from Mexico. We need to help that out. Some of those companies need a little bit of support from the government to get over the hump, to get things started, to spend on the R&D, to invent new products. And we got to do it to retrain the workers. You get people thrown out of work at 50, 52 years old, having known a job very well, have done a good job. Suddenly their plan is going, they need to modernize their skills. They can afford to do that on their own. That they may take a year of training to get skilled in something new that's coming down the pike, green energy or whatever it is, some new invention, some biotechnology, whatever it is. People need that. That's something that's a smart investment. Families invest. Businesses invest. The whole idea of investing in your future is smart until suddenly it's the federal government. Well, wait a second. Lincoln got the Congress in 1865 to fund and give land grants to build a transcontinental railroad. It opened up the West. It opened up tremendous economic development. Teddy Roosevelt, he got the Congress to fund the inland waterway system, modernize it, improve transportation inside America. Dwight Eisenhower, these are all Republican presidents, by the way. He got the Congress to pass the federal highway system, fund the federal highway. So we can do those kinds of things. But we got to do what I was talking to you about before. Fix gerrymandering, have open primaries, change the political system so the middle comes back. Those are things we've talked about, Dottie.
Okay.
Those are things we can do. We have to get active. We, the people, must take action. That's the last 6 words of my book.
You are inspiring. You're very inspiring. I thank you for all the work you've done, not just on this book, but on all the books that you've done, all the reporting you've done. You make a difference, for sure.
Thank you. So do you.
And I would like to invite everyone to please look at the credits at the end, because if you'd like to know more about how to get your copy of The American Dream, or maybe even get it signed at Gibson's Bookstore in Concord this week,
Okay.
you can do that tomorrow night. Yep. And if you want to get in touch with Hedrick, you can have all of his contact information there at the end of the show. If you need anything from us, you can call the Londonderry Access Center at 432-1147. And I hope to see you again soon. And please let me know what you thought of the show. And if there's a topic you would like us to discuss, we're here for you. Thank you.